Hey guys, so you really wanted me to make this video, some of you at least, many of you, given the comments and the upvotes in the second response video that I did to Nikocado. So first, I am not doing this, I'm not trying to come down hard on Brianna for this. I know it's going to seem that way anyway. And also, side note, some of you guys were real dicks in the comments, by the way. Most of you were not. Most of you were just talking about the arguments that Brianna was making or criticizing those, but some of you were getting rather personal for just no reason. So, like, maybe don't do that. It's just unnecessary, and it probably makes people feel kind of bad when you do that. So, like, maybe don't do that. So yeah, I do want to start actually with the things that I liked about Brianna's video. First, I liked toward the end when she talked about certain vegans being rather aggressive towards other vegans or non-vegans. And while she doesn't agree with that approach, she can understand it to some degree. And I liked the point that she made there. I also liked at the beginning of the video where she talked about, while she does know Nick personally and she could have messaged him privately, she wanted to do a public video because it would reach more people. And money also, she didn't say that, but let's be real, this is going to make money. Sending a private message, not going to make money. It's probably another reason. But yeah, she's right. It is better to do something where you are going to reach more people who may have the same concerns that Nick has. That's a good thing. If the information that you provide is actually helpful. Spoiler, Brianna's video, kind of a mess.
I can't even talk. You're a terrible person just because you don't eat what I eat.
I cannot believe that I am about to make this video.
Coming off like you are reveling in the fact that someone is considering not being vegan anymore, maybe not the best way to start a video.
It's just very obvious that we are not designed to eat meat just by comparing our digestive tract to that of an omnivore or a carnivore, right? Because their digestive tracts are a lot shorter, which allows them to digest meat very, very quickly and get it right out of their system. But because our digestive tracts are a lot longer, it allows us to digest more fibrous foods and absorb the nutrients from those foods. Seriously, it's just so obvious if you just compare a basic diagram, a carnivore or an omnivore versus a human. It's obvious that we have very, very different digestive systems, and our digestive tract is not designed to take on meat.
So her argument basically boils down to humans can't digest meat because our digestive tracts are longer than a tiger's. Okay, yes, they are longer than carnivores, but that is so we can process like fibrous plants. Humans can't digest meat. That claim does not follow from that. We obviously can digest meat. In fact, certain nutrients are actually better absorbed, more bioavailable from animal products than from plants, things like iron and zinc and protein. Part of the reason for this is because of the fiber present in plants, which is actually something that we can't digest. Fiber is good, of course, it's an important part of human health, but whether or not we can 100% digest something is not a good reason for eating or not eating it. As far as being designed or having evolved to eat meat, we certainly have evolved eating meat. Our ancestors definitely ate meat, along with a bunch of other foods, a bunch of plants, a bunch of weird things like bark as well. They were absolutely omnivores, which has allowed us to survive on a variety of foods. In fact, meat was very likely a very important part of our evolution, being a good source of calories and protein. Remember, we didn't always have access to beans and stovetops to cook them on. In some regards, we have actually evolved away from eating certain plant foods. For instance, we no longer have the ability to digest cellulose. This was the former role of our appendix, meaning that it would be pretty difficult for us to eat and digest super fibrous foods like tough foliage and even tree bark that our relatives lived on and live on in terms of other great apes today. In large part, this is thanks to cooking, which has allowed us to rely on easier to digest starches like grains and legumes as major sources of calories. So we don't have to spend all day chewing. It's pretty great. All that said, none of this really matters. As I said in my response to Nick, my original response, just because we have the ability to survive on a large variety of foods doesn't mean that we have to. doesn't even mean that we should. Even though we can digest red meat and get a number of nutrients from it, we know, thanks to research, that doing so increases our risk for colon cancer. And no, Brianna, this is not because meat rots inside of our colon. It's because of a number of possible mechanisms, one being heme iron. And even though fiber is indigestible, again, this is actually a good thing. It helps to facilitate digestion and helps to make us feel full. Also, again, thanks to research, we know that a diet predominated by plants reduces the risk for obesity, diabetes, and various cancers. Finally, again, thanks to research, we know that we can meet all of our needs on a vegan diet, and we know how to do this. For instance, we know that vitamin C consumption, along with iron from plants, non-heme iron, significantly improves iron absorption. We know that toasting nuts and seeds, soaking grains, and leavening bread and yeast improves zinc absorption. And we know that while plants do not provide B12, that we can easily get this from supplements that are cheap and safe and actually more efficient than getting it from meat and other animal products, or feces and contaminated water.
He feels like he might be deficient in something, and he feels like he may be lacking in certain nutrients. But as far as I'm aware, he hasn't been specific about the certain nutrients that he feels like he's lacking in. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, he hasn't gone into specific detail about what nutrients he feels like he's lacking in.
Yes, Nick was all over the place in this video, but he did mention several nutrients: B12, DHA, creatine, and others. Why not mention these and address them, how to meet them on a vegan diet, or whether or not they even need to be met at all? Maybe because she can't?
A lot of the vitamin and mineral deficiencies that occur in society are actually not a result of eating a vegan diet, or that, plants are actually, naturally deficient in these things. It's because of the circumstances and the mass production, of food and the food industry at its current state, right? Because, obviously a lot of the people that grow food, they're just after money. They want to create as many crops as possible for as little space and as money as possible, right? So therefore, the soils that the food is grown in have become depleted.
First, shame on Brianna for demonizing farmers like this by saying that most of them only care about money. Yes, farmers, like everyone else, have to make money, and they do this by making sure that their plants produce as much food as possible. And yeah, this comes at a cost. There is a reason you normally don't see heirloom tomatoes in the grocery store, and when you do, they tend to be much more expensive, and they tend to be in much shorter supply, right? You usually don't see a whole lot of them, or they don't last very long, or they tend to rot very quickly. A tomato that is super delicious and really juicy tends to have much thinner skin that's prone to cracking and rotting, and terrible yield. On the other hand, a typical conventional store-bought tomato that has mediocre flavor and mealy texture tends to have much thicker skin that allows it to be stacked and shipped easily, and terrific yield. That's not to say that the most delicious produce is necessarily the most nutritious. In fact, the opposite is often true. The wild ancestor of our present-day corn is a grassy plant called teosinte. It is hard to see the family resemblance. Teosinte is a bushy plant with short spikes of grain instead of ears, and each spike has only 5 to 12 kernels. The kernels are encased in shells so dense you need a hammer to crack them open. Once you extract the kernels, you wonder why you bothered. The dry tidbit of food is a lot of starch and little sugar. Teosinte has 10 times more protein than the corn we eat today, but it was not soft or sweet enough to tempt our ancestors. In other words, there are always trade-offs. If a farmer wants to grow more nutritious produce, he certainly can, but you better believe that he is going to charge you for it. He has to, because it's going to take him more time and more money to grow that food. I don't know about Brianna, but I personally cannot afford heirloom tomatoes on a regular basis. I personally am very, very, very grateful, very thankful for the money-hungry farmers and scientists who are constantly figuring out ways to improve yield and make food cheaper. How else are we going to feed this growing population? Second, what is Brianna's point here? I know that first was really, really long, but second, what is her point? Yes, intensive agriculture has depleted soils, and yes, our foods are less nutritious as a result. Side note, this is actually why I'm pro genetic modification, because of its potential to reduce the need for destructive practices like tilling, but whatever. But seriously, what is her point? How does this address Nick's concerns? Nick's point was that if a certain food does not have a certain nutrients, then it doesn't matter how much of that certain food he eats, he is not going to meet his need for that certain nutrients. Answering this by saying, plant foods aren't sufficient because of how they're grown. Okay, so just eat a bunch of plants grown in terrific soil and you will meet your need for B12? Of course not. It doesn't matter how many plants you eat, no matter how terrific the soil they are grown in is, you're not going to meet your needs for B12 from plants. This is why it is crucial that all vegans supplement for B12. Or eat shit. Take your pick. A better response would be to address the specifics, the specific nutrients that Nick mentions, the ones that he thinks are lacking from a vegan diet. Again, B12, DHA, creatine, etc. Brianna's response here, like her response to humans being omnivores, is just another example of her really wanting a vegan diet to be a natural diet, to be the correct diet for humans, as she puts it. But wanting something is not going to make it so. The idea that a prehistoric diet can be approximated today, or that it would be the most optimal diet, is really questionable. Today's commercial plant foods and meats are different from the foods available in prehistoric times. We eat hybrids of plants and we feed foods to farmed animals that they would not normally eat. Farmed animals are typically given a wide range of supplements in their feed. The U.S. food supply is routinely fortified with a host of vitamins and minerals, such as vitamin D in milk, and most people who turn to what they consider to be a more natural diet as adults have often benefited from this supplementation. In the last 200 years, nutrition science has solved all sorts of serious health problems that plagued humanity for eons. Just like every single modern diet, every single one, a vegan diet is completely unnatural. Hence my channel name. No, it's not because I love soy and gluten and Splenda and live off of these things, although that is totally true. It's because a vegan diet, even a whole food plant-based vegan diet with no Splenda at all, shocker, is totally unnatural. We can eat this way today because of unnatural manufactured B12, unnatural industrialized agriculture, and unnatural grocery stores stocked with an array of calorically dense plants like grains, beans, and nuts. There are plenty of reasons to be vegan, don't get me wrong, but because it's natural is not one of them.
I don't know everything that he eats. I'm not saying that this is what he eats 24/7, but I'm just saying if the types of foods that he eats in his mukbangs are anything to go by, he might just want to look into the types of foods that he is eating in order to solve any or at least help any vitamin and mineral deficiencies that he might be enduring at the moment.
I agree, but Nick hasn't been doing this for very long. What about the years that he spent following Freely and the rest? Eating tons of fruit and tons of potatoes and whatnot and very little fat and protein. Honestly, I find that way more concerning.
I used to use the whole argument of, circle of life, well, we're not lions. Just because a lion has to eat doesn't mean we have to eat it. So according to what?
According to our basic physiology.
No! As I said in my response, according to science. Just because we don't have sharp teeth or claws doesn't mean that a vegan diet is the correct diet for humans or that meat is toxic and we can't digest it. Instead, we know from research that just because we can get a variety of nutrients from meat, we don't have to eat meat to get those nutrients. And there are actually downsides to eating meat, like saturated fat, that make plants a better source of these nutrients.
So just comparing yourself to another animal or another life form is 100% completely useless. You do not see a giraffe comparing itself to a snail.
That's because giraffes can't make comparisons. What does this have to do with anything? She was really good up until that part, though. Just because other life forms have to kill to survive doesn't mean that we have to, or that it's right to do so.
If I can observe, if my mom can observe, if my best friends can observe, if Orlin can observe, that the long-term vegans, a lot of them tend to be crazy, there's an imbalance in the head, perhaps it's a reflection that they're not getting what they need for their organism.
Long-term vegans are crazy. Long-term vegans have mental health issues. What did you base that on?
That's not what he said. He said that the long-term vegans that he has observed seem to be crazy and that this could possibly be due to a nutrient deficiency. I'm surprised that Brianna is surprised by this, given how often people claim that vegans are crazy. Plus, some research has actually found a correlation between mental illness, certain mental illnesses, and vegetarianism. Of course, this doesn't mean that going vegetarian causes the mental illness, as Nick speculates. In fact, it's more likely to be the other way around, that having a mental illness or being prone to mental illness increases the risk, so to speak, makes you more drawn or more likely to adopt a vegetarian diet, as the authors of these studies actually talk about in their studies, and as I talk about in this video. Still, it is a concern when popular vegans like Freely and Christina promote diets like Raw Till 4 and Fully Raw, diets that Nick followed for so long. It would not shock me at all to learn that these diets are just as bad for your mental health as they are for your physical health. So really what Brianna's video boils down to is a vegan diet is natural, just look at our teeth. To be fair, a lot of Nick's arguments are appeal to nature as well, but the answer to that is not more appeal to nature than you just have like a blind leading the blind situation. I think a lot of the problem here is that Brianna is still stuck. In a lot of ways, she's still stuck in her raw food ways. I know she is no longer eating raw fruit-based. She's eating cooked foods now, and possibly some more fat. I'm not sure about that. But she is still making a lot of the same arguments that raw vegans, that the sillier, like natural vegans make. You know, she's still making the meat rots in your colon, we're not designed to eat meat kind of bullshit argument. She's still making the, oh no, we could totally eat a vegan diet in nature. Don't worry about B12, I guess. It's just because the soils are depleted. She's still making these kind of arguments. It seems like she hasn't re-educated herself, so to speak, since giving up cooked food. I mean, since incorporating cooked food, you know what I mean. A great example is when she talks about how, you know, we can't like track down an animal and tear it up with our non-existent claws and our non-existent sharp teeth. And then, you know, we wouldn't ideally eat it raw. You know, we would cook it and add spices and flavorings and whatnot. But this is an argument that raw vegans use, like against eating grains and legumes, that we don't eat them raw, we have to cook them or at least sprout them and then add like flavorings to make them tasty. I'm sure Brianna knows this. I'm sure she used this when she was raw. So then if she's still using this argument, why is she eating cooked grains and legumes? So Brianna, if you are watching this, I would just say, please consider like re-educating yourself and kind of update your thinking on veganism. Because again, I think you're still using a lot of these like bullshit raw vegan reasons. I would say check out philosophicalvegan.com for the kind of animal ethics stuff. There's a lot of good stuff there. And for vegan nutrition, check out veganhealth.org and theveganrd.com. And you can watch this video for information on why I choose those sources, those experts, those RDs as experts on vegan nutrition. To be clear, I'm not saying that every vegan has to be an expert on these topics. I'm not saying you have to know every single thing about, you know, animal ethics, every nuance or every single thing about vegan nutrition. Not at all. In fact, you know, just knowing that eating animals and animal byproducts causes unnecessary suffering, and that a world with less unnecessary suffering is better than a world with more unnecessary suffering, these in and of themselves are enough to be vegan. And just having a basic understanding of vegan nutrition will allow you to follow a vegan diet correctly. But if you are going to present yourself as an educator, if you are going to gain followers on the premise that you know what you're talking about and you know how to follow a vegan diet and you can help them follow a vegan diet, or that you understand why you should be vegan in the first place, then you should know how to answer these questions, or at least know where to point people so that they can figure out the answer for themselves. If you're going to take the time to respond to someone's concerns, about creatine in a vegan diet, you should be able to answer that question and not just like ignore it maybe. you should be able to answer these concerns, or don't make that video. Or you know what, say that you don't know. That's okay too. It's okay to say that you don't know the answer to something. And it's okay to go into a video not knowing the answer and maybe to research for yourself and try to learn. I mean, every time I make a response, every single time, maybe not every single time, but 9 times out of 10, I have to research something to figure out what the answer is, or to just make sure that I'm not misremembering, or to kind of re-educate myself. Like the creatine thing. You know, I'd answered that in a video a couple years ago. I did a lot of research figuring that out because I had never heard of creatine before that, other than just like, it makes your muscles big. So with this video, it had been a while. I had to look into that again. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. It's good to constantly be learning, and it's good to admit that you were wrong, number one, but also that you don't know something. It's certainly a lot better than just saying, well, a vegan diet is natural, case closed. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, as always, you can leave those down below. If you want to subscribe, and I'll have a new video very soon.